You are going to face 4 tests from God before you die, and if no one ever reveals them to you, you will almost certainly fail at least one. Right now, as you listen to this, you are already inside one of those exams without even realizing it. It has nothing to do with how many sermons you've heard, how many Bible verses you remember, or the image you show on the outside. God is looking at something else, and when He calls you, He is not going to ask how many times you pretended to trust Him, but what you did in these 4 tests. If you fail, it's not that you stop belonging to God, but you can waste entire years of your life walking on autopilot, with your soul switched off, breathing on the outside but empty on the inside. In this message, I'm going to show you, one by one, the 4 tests that God puts in front of every person before they die. Among them, there is one that is God's final test before you die. If you ignore it, everything you built here can collapse in an instant. And the third is the most dangerous one, because almost no one realizes they are already failing it until it's too late. Don't leave before you hear it. As we go forward, I want you to do something brave. Seriously ask yourself which of these tests you're re-failing today. And if at any moment you feel that God is speaking to you, write in the comments, "I don't want to waste my life." Let it be recorded as a decision before Him. Imagine this, a person who says they believe in God, who talks about faith, who even prays, but who in secret lives exhausted, full of fear, frustrated because they feel that nothing changes. They wake up, work, rush all day, lie down with a tired heart, and repeat the same thing the next day. They think their problem is work, family, money, circumstances, but in reality, they are inside a test they haven't recognized. Maybe that sounds way too close to home for you. It's not a coincidence that you're listening to these words. This is not just another video. You could be doing anything else, and yet here you are, in front of the screen, with a part of you that suspects God wants to tell you something specific. There are 4 tests that repeat over and over again in history, in the lives of well-known characters, in anonymous people, and in yours. They don't show up with a big sign that says, "Attention, this is a test." They come disguised as delays, losses, hard decisions, and seasons where it seems like heaven is silent. But behind all of that is a hand that knows your heart better than you do. The first has to do with what you desire the most and hasn't arrived. The second with what you love and might lose. The third with what God asks of you and you don't understand. The fourth with those moments when you feel that no one sees you and that even God has left. You're already in at least one of these for right now. And if you keep pretending it's not happening, you're only going to stretch out the pain. I want you to listen to this calmly, but not as a spectator. Listen as someone standing in front of a real exam. Don't listen thinking about other people. Don't think this is perfect for that friend or that family member. Do something more uncomfortable and more honest. Listen as if God were writing your name at the top of each test. The first test many people face is the test of waiting. That season where you ask, cry out, plead for something legitimate, something that isn't bad, something you even believe God Himself promised you, and yet nothing moves. The situation doesn't change, the answer doesn't come, the door doesn't open. The only thing that seems to move is the clock. The test of waiting is not about minutes or days. It's about the feeling that God is silent when you need Him the most. You pray and heaven feels like stone. You do the right thing, but things don't line up the way you thought they would. You see others moving forward, reaching goals, receiving what you've been asking for over years, and you secretly ask yourself why God answers over there and not here. There are people who have been waiting for months or years for something, a health breakthrough, a change in their family, freedom from a debt, an opportunity, clarity about their purpose, and while they wait, their hearts fill with internal negotiations. They start making backup plans, plan B, C, and D, just in case God doesn't come through. They keep talking about faith, but inside they live in fear. Maybe you're right there, in a waiting that has gone on so long, you're no longer sure if it makes sense to keep trusting. You've thought things you don't dare say out loud. You've thought that maybe God forgot about you, that maybe you didn't hear Him right, that you're not as important to Him as others are. You've compared your process to other people's, and you've come out losing. I want you to picture the heart of someone who waited for years for something God had promised. Not a week, not a month, not a year. Years. Every sunrise was a reminder that time kept moving and the promise was still unfulfilled. Every birthday was a mix of gratitude and pain. Every comment from others was one more small wound. In that test, what God is looking at is not your ability to put on a good face or to say the right phrases. He is looking at what you do when He doesn't give you anything new. When there are no signs, no confirmations, no open doors. When the loudest voice you hear is your own anxiety. That's where it's revealed whether you trust God or the outcome. Waiting becomes dangerous when you start negotiating your convictions. When you say things like, maybe it wasn't that serious. Maybe it's not so bad if I do this. Everyone else does it anyway. When you start moving your boundaries to try to get by your own strength, what hasn't He arrived in your timing? That S where waiting stops being preparation and turns into a shortcut that takes you away from what God wanted to give you. There, S, something very strong about this test. You, Dan, T, notice the moment when you stopped waiting on God and started waiting on money, on a person, on your own effort. You keep using the same words, but the weight of your trust has shifted. You no longer rest, you no longer trust, you're just enduring. If you feel like this first test describes you, I want you to recognize it inside. You don't have to write a speech. Just acknowledge, I'm tired of waiting, but I don't want to let go of God's hand. That sincere acknowledgement is worth more than 1,000 pretty phrases. And before we continue, I'm going to ask you for something very specific. If this first test is speaking directly to you, leave a comment saying in what area of your life you feel you're waiting. You don't have to give intimate details if you don't want to. Just write something like, I am in the waiting, or I am waiting for a change. It's not just for the algorithm. It's a way of breaking the habit of suffering in silence and beginning to expose your process before God. There is a second test that is even more painful for many, the test of loss. That season when God allows something you love to leave, to change, to break, or to no longer be available the way it was before. Sometimes it's a relationship, sometimes a job, a life plan, a sense of security. It's not always a visible tragedy. Sometimes it's an internal shift that leaves you feeling like you're no longer in control. The test of loss reveals where you had really placed your heart, beyond your words. It's easy to say your life is in God's hands when everything is in its place. It's easy to talk about surrender when nothing is being touched. But when He touches exactly what you thought would never move, what you were truly worshipping comes to light. Maybe there was a season where you felt everything fit. You had a clear plan, you knew where you were going. You had people by your side you thought would always be there. And suddenly something breaks. The job that gave you security breaks. The relationship you had idealized breaks. The dream you had spent years building breaks. You don't know if God took it away, if you lost it, or if it was a mix of both. The only thing you know is that now there's a void. In that test, it's very easy to blame. To blame others, to blame yourself, to blame God. It's easy to fall into the question, if God loves me, why did He allow this? But there's an even deeper question than that. Who was really the owner of what I lost, me or God? What we don't like to admit is that many times we said it was His, but we lived as if it belonged to us. When something becomes the center of your identity, any threat against it feels like a threat against your very existence. If your worth was in your image, any criticism is devastating. If your worth was in your partner, any conflict feels like a death. If your worth was in your job, any change feels like a total rejection. The test of loss exposes what place each thing really had in your heart. This is not about minimizing the pain. Loss hurts. Sometimes it hurts so much that words are unnecessary. God does not mock that pain. He doesn't enjoy watching you suffer. But in the middle of that pain, He is looking at something you see in that moment. Who you are when the only thing left is Him. Maybe you've had nights where you've wondered if it's worth going on. You've looked around and only seen the remains of what you once dreamed. You've felt like everything slipped out of your hands, like you did the best you could, and even so, things fell apart. And you've thought, even if you don't say it, God abandoned me. But the reality is that there are moments when God allows what you built in your own strength to fall, so He can give you something you cannot build alone. He doesn't tear things down out of cruelty, but to free what you were clinging to too tightly. Sometimes you have to end up with empty hands in order to receive what He wanted to put there from the beginning. In this second test, the question is not, why did you take this from me? But do I trust that what God has for me is better than what I lost, even if I don't understand it right now? That question tears at your pride, but it also opens the door to a peace that doesn't depend on circumstances. I want you to think for a moment about the thing, the person, the dream, or the sense of safety you are most afraid of losing. That thing that, if God asked you for it, would be the hardest to let go of. Don't say it lightly. Let the image show up in your mind. Maybe it already has. What you're seeing is probably the most sensitive point of this test in your life. If you're brave enough, write it in a comment in your own words. Something like, it's hard for me to let go of my job, or it's hard for me to let go of this relationship, or it's hard for me to let go of my life plan. That's not weakness. That's honesty. And God works with honest people, not perfect people. Up to this point, we've talked about two tests, waiting and loss. If you already saw yourself in them, I want to tell you something important. You're not listening to this by coincidence. God is using even a screen and a voice to touch areas you had buried. And if you already feel like this is for you, I'm going to ask you for something else. Subscribe and stay close to this content. Not because a channel is special, but because you need to surround yourself with reminders that you are not alone in what you're going through. Do it now and then keep listening, because what's coming is even more confronting. There is a third test that almost no one passes the first time. It's not as visible on the outside, but it defines destiny's paths and generations. It's the test of obedience, when God's instructions make sense to your logic. There are moments when God is not asking you to understand. He is asking you to respond. He puts in front of you a decision that doesn't match your calculations. He asks you to forgive someone who hurt you more than anyone imagines. He asks you to leave a relationship that gives you company, but you know it pulls you away from him. He asks you to do something that scares you, something that humanly doesn't guarantee results, something that brings all your insecurities to the surface. In this test, it isn't about whether you feel ready, it's about whether you are willing, because you want to know everything before you take the first step. You want to see the whole map, the route, the timing, the guarantees. You want God to explain why, for what, how long it will last, what you're going to gain. And when you don't have answers, you stay stuck, negotiating in your mind. There are decisions that, deep down, you already know God has spoken to you about. You don't need another confirmation, because you have felt the same nudge inside you for a long time. You've felt it in moments of silence. You've felt it in messages. You've even felt it when watching other people's lives. But you've postponed it again and again. You've said, when I'm more stable, when I have more money, when I feel more prepared. And the truth behind those phrases is simple. You're afraid. The obedience God is looking for is not comfortable obedience. It's not doing only what fits your plans. It's handing over control even when everything in you wants to cling on. It's saying yes when you don't know how you're going to do it, but you know who is asking you for it. It's trusting God's voice more than your own conclusions. This test is the one that knocks down many people who look strong. On the outside they can seem stable, speak beautifully, sound firm. But when God touches that specific area where there has to be a radical change, they stay where they are. And they say, one day I'll obey, one day I'll change this. They repeat it so much they convince themselves that this is already obedience, but it isn't. Saying someday I'll obey is a way to disobey with good intentions. It's an elegant way of telling God, I still don't trust what you know enough. I still trust my calendar more, and that's something that sooner or later comes with a price. I want you to think about the last thing you know you need to do and haven't done. Not something someone else imposed on you, but something that, when you hear it, you know God has been addressing you about it. Maybe it's a hard conversation you've been avoiding. Maybe it's dropping a habit you know is damaging your soul. Maybe it's starting something you're afraid to fail at. Don't change the subject in your mind. Don't hide behind excuses. If you know there is a clear instruction in your heart, this is your test. And it's not about feeling like it. It's about trusting him enough to take the step even while you're trembling. If this is touching something deep in you, write a short phrase in the comments without sharing details you don't want to. Something like, I know what I have to do. You're not writing it to earn points. You're rewriting it as a way of recognizing that you don't want to stay paralyzed. There is one more test, and this is the one many people misunderstand. The test of the desert, of loneliness, of apparent absence. That stage where God seems to have turned off all the lights around you. Suddenly people leave, activities stop, doors that used to be open close. What used to give you a sense of spiritual closeness doesn't produce anything anymore. You go to meetings, you listen to messages, you sing songs, and yet inside you feel far away. In that season, the biggest temptation is to think you did something so serious that God stepped back. You start replaying your story, looking for flaws, mistakes, sins, trying to find the explanation for why you feel this way. But it's not always a punishment. Many times it's an appointment, an initiative from God to meet with you without filters. There are stages where God pulls you out of all the noise to show you how much you depended on that noise. You depended on other people's approval. You depended on events. You depended on the emotion of the moment. And when He takes those away for a while, it's just you and Him, and you re-confronted with an uncomfortable truth. You didn't know Him as much as you thought you did. In the test of the desert, you look into the inner mirror and discover that a lot of your strength came from what others thought of you. You discover that many of your decisions came from fear and not from trust. You discover that many of your words were repeated, not genuine. And that hurts, because you see yourself without decorations. But it is exactly there that God speaks in the deepest way. Not with noise, but with whispers. Not with shows, but with truths that go straight to the roots. He shows you wounds you never dealt with. He shows you emptiness you filled with things that could never really fill you. He shows you areas where you were performing for others instead of living before Him. Many people, when they enter this stage, become desperate. They run back to anything that gives them a sense of security. They look for activities. They look for noise. They look for distractions. They can't stand being alone with their own soul. And by doing that, they lengthen the test. They keep going in circles, repeating cycles, returning to places that no longer have life for them. The test of the desert doesn't end when you get back everything you lost. It ends when you discover that, even if you don't get anything back, God is still enough. When you can say, from an authentic place, even if nothing changes on the outside, inside, I'm no longer the same. That is the difference between someone who came out bitter and someone who came out transformed. Maybe you're there right now. You feel like no one really understands you, like there are no words that fully describe what you're going through. You've tried to explain it, but you only get shallow answers. Maybe people have even told you that you're exaggerating, that it's not that serious, that you just need to distract yourself. But inside you there's something deeper, a sense that God is working in silence. I want you to hear this from the depth of your soul. You are not abandoned. The test of the desert is not an eternal punishment. It is a season where God is pulling out things that cannot coexist with the purpose He has for your life. He is cleaning, rearranging, pruning, and pruning always hurts, but it always prepares for greater fruit. If you feel that you're in that stage, I want you to write one single word in the comments. Desert. It doesn't matter if no one else understands why you wrote it. God knows exactly what you mean. And that small act of honesty can be the start of a deeper conversation with Him. We've talked about waiting, loss, obedience, and the desert. For tests that are not theories, they are real processes. None of them looks the same in two people. But they all have something in common. In each one, God is not looking for you to act. He is looking for you to truly surrender. Maybe by now you already feel like everything inside you has been stirred up. You've remembered moments in your life you thought were closed chapters. You felt tears you'd been holding back. You wanted to pause the video and go on with your day, so you, Dan T, have to touch this anymore. But if you've come this far, it's because a part of you no longer wants to keep running away. Now I want to speak to you directly, as if we were face to face. Don't ignore this. Don't say, I'll think about it later. He has been wanting to deal with things in you for years, and you've found 1,000 ways to postpone it. But at some point you had to arrive here. The moment of deciding whether you going to keep failing the same tests or you going to allow God to transform you. It's not to expose you, it's so that you yourself leave a visible record that you, Dan T, want to hide anymore. If you made it this far, I want to thank you, but more than that, I want to honor your courage. Not everyone stays until the end when something confronts them. No one does. That's why these tests are so serious. You can keep postponing what God wants to do in your heart as if you had many years guaranteed. And in this moment, God is reminding you of something you've tried to forget. You are still loved, even in the middle of the test. Before you close this video, I want to leave you with one last image. Imagine your life as a book. He is looking for every page where, despite everything, you came back to Him. Maybe the tests that hurt you today are exactly the pages you'll be most grateful for one day. If this message confronted you, spoke to you, made you uncomfortable, or gave you peace, don't leave it here. And there is a hand reaching out even in the darkest desert. Don't walk through these tests alone. Walk through them with God. And if this content helps you remember that, stay, walk with us, and share this journey with others. Now it's your turn. Comment, decide, share, and take God's hand in the test you're in. Don't let this be just one more voice in the middle of the noise. Let it be the beginning of a real change.